It's time for this week's RSPW Rewind. That clown music you hear in the background during these segments, which you'll hear a little bit later, has never been more appropriate than it is this week. For all of the fun television that came out of the Attitude Era, there was also a lot of bad television and bad gimmicks. And one such gimmick that stands out is Beaver Cleavage. Beaver Cleavage was meant to be a takeoff on the old Leave It to Beaver TV show from the 1950s. Of course, during the Attitude Era especially, Beaver had a very different meaning than it did back when Leave It to Beaver was on the air. Jim Cornette was also yelling at them in production meetings. But anyway, when Thrasher of the Headbangers went down with a knee injury, they needed something for Mosh to do. And Beaver Cleavage was their great idea. They dressed him up like Beaver Cleaver. The idea actually came from years of Jerry Briscoe ribbing Chaz, call him by his real name here, for looking like Beaver Cleaver, in his very first passport photo. And then after a while, with Russo, it morphed into what we saw on TV. Maryana was a Canadian bodybuilder. She was a Canadian fitness model. They brought in, sound familiar? She was Trish Stratus before Trish came along. She just never had the same success that Trish went on to have. But they brought her in to play Beaver's mother, and there were incestuous overtones in the dialogue between them. He would, be eating dry cereal, and then she would offer him some of her mother's milk. Wink, wink. Stuff like that. Beaver himself said, Jesus Christ, I can't call him Beaver with a straight face. Chaz. His name is Chaz. Chaz has said in interviews that they wanted to start insinuating that he was having sex with his mother, basically. That's where the angle was headed before it got dropped. There's been no less than 3 times over the years that Vince McMahon has wanted to do an incest angle on his television show. This was the first. And then, I believe this was the first. There was something with Shamrock and Ken Shamrock and his fake sister, Ryan Shamrock. I don't know if that ever rose to the level of them wanting to do an incest angle, but I've heard stories about that as well. But this might have been the first time. And then later on, his own daughter, Stephanie, she has admitted on WWE programming, on one of the DVDs, she admitted that when she was pregnant the first time with her first child, her father wanted to do an angle where it would be revealed that the child that she was carrying was his. And when everybody said, "You're out of your fucking mind, we're not doing that," his alternate idea, his backup plan, was for it to be revealed that her brother, Shane, was the father of her child. Thankfully, that didn't happen either. Then years later, if you remember, they brought in Katie Lee Burchill as the valet for her brother, Pirate Paul Burchill, with the idea of doing an incest angle involving the two of them. But this was around the time the WWE suddenly went all PG programming, and then it got dropped. Katie Lee Burchill has done interviews, or Katarina, I guess her name is. She's done interviews saying that she was actually disappointed that they didn't go through with it. And she says the idea that, they would have treated it with respect. They were going to treat the angle with respect. A respectful incest angle on WWE television. There is no such thing. That doesn't exist. So thankfully that never happened either. The sad part is, here's the sad part. The sad part is we can laugh at Vince McMahon's obsession with this, but he told Playboy magazine many years ago that he was molested by his mother as a child. Or at least he hinted at it. He didn't deny it when the author pressed him on it. He was basically saying, there was this was happening in the home and it wasn't with the male. So leave it to your imagination. There's only one other option in that case of who it was. And I think he said basically the same thing he did an interview many years ago on Howard Stern, and basically said the same thing. And Howard asked him, "Hey, have you gone to therapy?" And Vince said no. So when we talk about what a weird guy Vince McMahon comes across as, and the stories that people tell about him that have worked with him before, the things he does, the things he goes on TV and says, even when he's not playing a character, even when he's not Mr. McMahon, it's not surprising to learn that he had such a messed up childhood. It's pretty messed up that this is the end result. I'm sure a lot of his quirks and a lot of his not so finer qualities, could very well be chalked up in part to him having such a fucked up childhood. But anyway, he had one match, Chaz did, in the Beaver Cleavage gimmick. It was a win over Christian 2 days after Owen Hart fell to his death. And between Owen's death and the sudden increased scrutiny that whole situation brought on the company, and then Sable filed a $100 million sexual harassment lawsuit against the company like a week later, the gimmick was quickly dropped. By the way, in that lawsuit, Sable alleged, among other things, that the company wanted her to do a lesbian storyline that she was not comfortable with. Fast forward 3 or 4 years later, Sable's back on TV in WWE on SmackDown, doing a lesbian angle with Tori Wilson. Or at least it was one segment. I definitely remember a segment where they kissed in the ring. But anyway. But I don't know why I find that funny. She sued the company, among other things, because, lesbian storyline. And then 3 years later, she's doing a lesbian-type storyline. Anyway. So they dropped it. And they had Chaz come out on TV. How they did this was, he came out on TV and he cut a work shoot promo about how stupid the gimmick was, and instead he admitted that Maryana was not his mother, but she was his girlfriend. And later on TV, Chaz dumped her, and they did a domestic violence storyline where she would show up with a black eye one lip, and she'd show up with a fat lip another week, and bruises on her face, insinuating that Chaz beat her up. And when she tried to have him arrested one week, Thrasher returned, and he made the save, and he showed footage that proved that she made the whole thing up. And then she was never seen again after that. And unfortunately, in real life, Maryana passed away a few years, I think it was only a few years later. It was probably only 3 or 4 years later she died from breast cancer, and she was only in her mid-30s. Which brings us to RSPW, and what the fine folks there were saying about Beaver Cleavage at the time. April 27th, 1999, Danger 3210, with a post titled, Beaver Cleavage, I couldn't stop laughing. I don't know, the whole thing just seemed very funny to me. I laughed throughout the entire segment. Will this get Mosh in the spotlight? Whenever they make coming soon movies for a wrestler, they are trying to push the wrestler. Sometimes it works, like Val Venus. Sometimes it fails miserably. Remember those Real Man's Man videos? Oh, I do. Oh, I've got a whole RSPW segment planned on that, don't you worry. Danger 3210. If you're still out there, 21 years later, if you're listening. I do hear from people from time to time, by the way. I've gotten questions. Hey, do you ever hear from anybody who heard their post read in one of your RSPW segments here 25 years later? The answer is yes. And in a lot of cases, they're not very happy with me. In fact, I got what was basically a death threat from one person who was very upset that I used his post. I don't even think he posted anything really terrible. It wasn't like I'm trying to make him look bad. But yeah, some of the RSPW creatures do crawl out of their holes from time to time. WHG says, I wonder if Beaver Cleaver will be skipping down to the ring when he makes his debut. I miss the Headbangers as tag team champions of the universe, but I think Mosh's new gimmick as Beaver Cleaver will be a winner for them. Glenn says, I thought that was a dead angle, but after seeing the promo tonight, I'm so friggin' ready for his debut. I hope he brings his mommy with him. Rob Brownstein says, then he can feud with Jeff Jarrett and his mother, Deborah. I would mark out if on one Raw, Deborah McMichael walked to the announcer's table at ringside and threw down a pair of silicone breast implants right in front of Jerry Lawler. So you want puppies, King, do you? Well, here are your goddamn puppies. Well, that's kind of disturbing. May 31st, 1999, a post by Hardcore Hack, a frequent commenter here in RSPW, and not very well liked. I don't think Hardcore Hack had very many friends. Post titled, Beaver Cleavage is the stupidest gimmick today. I thought the days of Doink the Clown, plumbers, hockey players, 1-2-3 kid in a diaper, etc. were gone. But here Vince goes again with his circus act. This Beaver Cleavage gimmick makes me embarrassed to be a wrestling fan. WWF fans claim how cutting edge the promotion is, but the Beav just shows you how childish they are and always will be. Don Carpenter, looks like Hardcore Hack is not a fan of the Beaver. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Don Carpenter says, "Fuck you, Hack. Am I the only person that laughed at this gimmick? The idea is that it's supposed to be stupid, and Mrs. Cleavage looks ring ready with the shape that she is in." Hapjack says, "I will take Beaver Cleavage over Curt Hennig singing any day." Hey, Curt Hennig, think about that rap is crap gimmick in WCW. That's the gimmick that Curt Hennig always wanted. He always wanted to be a cowboy. I remember reading that years ago. I don't know if it was the Observer or the Torch or what it was. But that was what he wanted to be. He more identified with that gimmick than he ever did Mr. Perfect. Which kind of makes sense. I mean, if you think about where he grew up, apparently he was a big country music fan. You would never know it by looking at Mr. Perfect, like in the original Mr. Perfect gimmick. But no, he wanted to be more like a cowboy. Which is kind of funny, because when Bret Hart started, he was a cowboy. He's Cowboy Bret Hart. And then they quickly changed that. A lot of cowboys in wrestling. We got a cowboy now. Cowboy James Storm, right? He's in the NWA. Hangman Adam Page. I mean, he's got horses in his entrance video. He rode a horse to the ring once on an AEW pay-per-view. Anyway, NEC Fort nailed it with this comment. Said both promotions sporadically come up with lame and ridiculous gimmicks. Usually they don't last very long, i.e. Barry Darso's golfer gimmick and the leprechaun. Beaver Cleavage is just another example of a bad idea that may have sounded fun in the booking room. It's a one-joke act, albeit a sick one. Cleavage will be repackaged into another personality within 6 months. Little did he know it would be less than 30 days before he was repackaged into a new gimmick. Tank did not like Hardcore Hack's original post, but for a very different reason. If you aren't a child, then you put words together in a sentence like one. Your choice of words and how you put them together in a sentence shows that you are just a kid, or just have the intelligence of one. WWF fans claim how cutting edge the promotion is not a proper sentence. Stay late with your teacher, and maybe he can help. We've got a grammar Nazi here in RSPW. Vince Green says, "Come on, dude, you can't be serious. You cite the plumbers and clowns, but beat these, jackass. How about Lasertron, New Breed from the Future, Dungeon of Doom, RoboCop, Chucky, Conan and El Hijo de Conan, Gangsters from the Hood? All these folks appeared in WCW, and all of them were worse than Beaver. Beav's supposed to be stupid and kinda lame, but WCW honestly believes that the cool kids are still into the oh-so 1997 gangsta-type rap and the gear I would have worn 3 years ago. When in all honesty, they look lame. In closing, when it comes to stupidity, nobody beats WCW. Nobody. It's like The Wiz. Nobody beats The Wiz. Is that a New York thing? That might just be a New York. People have no idea what I'm talking about now. Although I do believe they incorporated that into an episode of Seinfeld, right? There used to be an electronics store here in New York called Nobody Beats the Wiz. That was the name of the store. It's probably been gone for like 15 years now. But they used to have these commercials. Nobody beats the Wiz. Nobody. Still remember that. That and those Crazy Eddie commercials. I think Crazy Eddie went to jail. June 2nd. 1999. Rockboy asks, anyone read the new Beaver Cleavage bio on WWF.com? Along with Mrs. Cleavage, this is the bio apparently the WWE put together for him. It says, along with Mrs. Cleavage, Harry Beaver Cleavage has arrived in the World Wrestling Federation and is looking to rack up victories. In an era of attitude, the Beav is a throwback to times gone by. In fact, when one of Beaver's opponents gives him attitude, that foe will soon get quite the verbal tongue lashing from Mrs. Cleavage, who looks just as young as the day that she had her little bundle of joy. The Beav is no boob when it comes to in-ring ability. He's a mat technician that can also take it to the air. With that combination, it's clear that Harry Beaver Cleavage will snatch more than a few victories here in the WWF. June 20th, 1999, John Burton says WWF already dropping the Beaver Cleavage angle. So this is showing you the very quick progression of how things just completely went downhill in the span of like a month. He says, unlike Bitch Off, Vince will drop a stupid angle that nobody seems to like. No one was happier to hear this news than our friend Hardcore Hack, who had this to say to the news that the angle was being dropped. Said WWF has reportedly realized how stupid the Beaver Cleavage angle is. According to Dave Scherer on OneWrestling.com, the WWF realized that they would get too much heat with the cleavage angle. Why WWF has an infatuation with doing an incest angle is beyond me. Another stupid angle, failing by the brainchild of Vince McMahon. And June 23rd, 1999, MKist99 wants to know what happened with Beaver on Raw. On Raw, they were about to interview Beaver before his match, but the interview looked like it fell short. Then Jim Ross said that the match with Beaver would not take place. Does anybody have any idea what happened? I'm not saying I wanted to see the match, I'm just curious about why they cut the interview short and why they canceled the match. Will Thomason says it was scripted. They used it to get rid of the gimmick. Malik says, I suspect that Chaz Beaver Cleavage Warrington did not like his new gimmick. That's why he said, I can't do this, and walked off. According to the latest Ross report, Beaver Cleavage has been fired. I thought the gimmick was hilarious. G. Purcell21 says, Warrington did not make the decision. It was WWF who decided to give the gimmick the axe when the character did not get the kind of response from the fans that they had hoped. And Clint, in a reply from May 25th, 2016 to this thread, very excitedly says, I can't believe I'm replying to something from 1999. Boy, was he happy about that. He was so excited to be replying to a thread here from 1999. And a lot of these threads, from what I see, are closed. I don't think you can post comments on them, but I guess he found one that he was able to post a comment on, and it was like stepping into a time capsule for him. So he felt very happy about that. This has been your weekly reminder that one day Vince McMahon will get his incest angle. And if I'm Ric Flair and Charlotte Flair, I'm not answering my phone if I see Vince McMahon's name pop up on my caller ID. I would avoid him at the buildings too if I see him. I would walk the other way.